The dawn breaks over the Philippine Sea, quiet, almost peaceful. But beneath that calm horizon, a storm of steel and fire is about to erupt. It's October 25th, 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in human history. Hundreds of ships stretch across the Pacific, and among them, a handful of small, unarmored destroyers drift like minnows in a sea of sharks. These destroyers, part of Task Unit 77.4.3, known by their radio call sign Taffy 3, were never meant to fight battleships. Their mission was to protect the escort carriers that supported American ground troops invading the Philippines. They were the shepherds of the fleet, not its warriors. But in a few hours, they'll make a decision that defies every expectation, a suicidal charge that will shock even the Japanese admirals watching from miles away. The American sailors wake to a humid morning sky. Most are half asleep, sipping lukewarm coffee, joking about how quiet it's been. Their small carriers launch slow-moving aircraft, Avengers, Wildcats, tiny prop planes that search for enemy subs and provide cover for the soldiers ashore. Nobody expects trouble. After all, the main Japanese fleet was supposed to be finished, broken beyond repair. Intelligence reports had assured everyone Japan couldn't mount another large offensive. But intelligence was wrong. Over the horizon, hidden by the haze of dawn, Admiral Takeo Kurita's powerful central force steams southward, an armada of over 20 warships. Massive battleships, including the terrifying Yamato, the largest battleship ever built, and her sister ships, bristling with 18-inch guns capable of tearing a destroyer apart in one salvo. Cruisers and destroyers swarm around them like wolves. Their mission: ambush the American landing forces at Leyte and crush the invasion in one decisive blow. At 6:45 a.m., lookouts aboard the tiny destroyer USS Johnston spot black shapes on the northern horizon. At first, they think it's a mirage. Then they see the flashes, sunlight glinting off steel turrets the size of houses. Someone yells into the bridge, "Ships! Big ones! Battleships!" Within seconds, the alarm sounds. Klaxons wail across the fleet. The quiet morning erupts into chaos. The American carriers try to flee east, launching every plane they can, even without bombs, anything to slow the enemy. The destroyers, small and fast, begin laying smoke screens, thick clouds of white vapor to hide the retreating carriers. But smoke won't stop shells. It won't stop a battleship's wrath. The Japanese fleet opens fire. Gigantic water plumes explode around the Americans. Each shell lands like a thunderclap. The ocean boils with fire. Aboard the USS Johnston, Commander Ernest E. Evans grips the bridge railing. He's half Cherokee, half white, a man with a reputation for fearlessness and grit. Just a year earlier, he promised his crew that if the time ever came, they'd go in harm's way. Now that time has come. Evans doesn't hesitate. "Hard left rudder," he orders. "All engines ahead flank." The destroyer lurches forward, turning straight toward the Japanese fleet. The crew stares in disbelief. They know what that means. He's going to attack. Johnston charges ahead alone. She's outgunned, outnumbered, and hopelessly outmatched. But Evans doesn't care. He knows the carriers behind him can't outrun the enemy. Someone has to buy them time. The ship's 5-inch guns open up, spitting fire at targets 10 times her size. The deck shudders under every recoil. Shell casings clatter across the steel floor. The crew works like machines, trained, focused, terrified. On the Japanese ships, confusion spreads. They expected American battleships, not toy destroyers charging straight at them. Some think it's a trick. Others assume these small ships must be leading the way for a larger fleet. Kurita hesitates, uncertain. That hesitation, a few seconds, will save thousands of American lives. Back on the Johnston, the radar screen lights up with incoming fire. Massive 14 and 18-inch shells scream overhead. One hits close, a blast that throws men off their feet, shaking the ship like a leaf. Shrapnel cuts across the deck, but Evans pushes forward, closing the distance to point-blank range. At 10,000 yards, 9,000, 8,000. Every gun on the Johnston is blazing. The destroyer fires torpedoes, 10 steel fish racing toward a Japanese cruiser. The men hold their breath. Seconds stretch into eternity. Then, at the flash, a roar. One torpedo slams into the heavy cruiser Kumano, ripping her bow apart in a column of smoke and fire. The crew erupts in cheers. For the first time, it feels like they might actually stand a chance. But that hope fades quickly. Dozens of enemy shells begin zeroing in. Evans' voice cuts through the intercom, calm but urgent. "Keep firing! Don't stop!" His tone is steady, no fear, no hesitation. The destroyer's guns keep pounding, shifting targets, laying down smoke, doing everything possible to confuse the enemy. But the ocean is now a killing field. Every splash is closer. Every explosion feels heavier. The Johnston is bleeding, its hull ripped open by shell fragments, but it refuses to stop. Meanwhile, other destroyers, Hull, Heermann, and the tiny destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts begin to join the fight. Seeing Evans' insane bravery, they can't just run. Smoke and fire fill the sky as more American ships peel out of formation and charge toward the enemy. What began as a hopeless defense turns into one of the most courageous counterattacks in naval history. The Japanese fleet, stunned by the Americans' audacity, begins to falter. Their fire control officers can't believe these small ships are charging battleships head-on. Some Japanese gunners miscalculate range, assuming they must be bigger ships. Chaos spreads. Radios crackle with confusion. Admiral Kurita watches from the bridge of his flagship, Yamato, unable to make sense of what he's seeing. Why are these small ships attacking? Why aren't the American battleships showing up? Could this be a trap? The battle rages on. Johnston takes another hit, her forward gun destroyed, her radar out. Fires rage below deck, but the crew fights on, manning what's left of the guns, feeding shells by hand. The sea around them is littered with burning debris, sinking planes and oil slicks. The destroyer is surrounded, but she's not alone anymore. The other small ships are closing in, turning the tide of the fight. At 7:50 a.m., the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, nicknamed the Sammy B., roars into battle at full speed. She's half the size of Johnston, built for convoy duty, not combat. Yet her captain orders a full-speed charge. She races through shell splashes, closing to within 4 miles of a Japanese cruiser before unleashing her torpedoes. Her crew cheers as explosions ripple across the enemy line. The little ships of Taffy III are writing history in fire and steel. As the first hour of the battle unfolds, one thing becomes clear. Courage can outweigh firepower. The destroyers of Taffy III have no armor, no heavy guns, and no backup, but they have heart. Against every law of warfare, they're standing toe-to-toe with Japan's most powerful fleet. The odds are impossible, but somehow impossibility is exactly what they do best. The battle has only begun, and the ocean is about to turn into hell itself. The sea is now alive with thunder. Explosions bloom across the horizon. The morning sky turned black with smoke and fire. The Japanese fleet, finally realizing what's happening, unleashes everything they've got. Battleships and cruisers fire their massive guns in a rolling, endless roar, each salvo shaking the ocean itself. Waterspouts rise hundreds of feet high, falling back like molten rain around the tiny American ships. The destroyer USS Hull is at the front now, charging into the maelstrom. Her decks rattle under the concussions. Her gunners can barely hear orders over the shriek of shells. Yet they keep firing. The captain shouts commands into the chaos, his words lost in static. Every man aboard knows what this means. There's no retreat. Only time. Time to buy for the carriers behind them. Hull zigzags through the water, laying down another smoke screen, hiding the carriers as best she can. But the Japanese are closing fast. The battleship Congo, one of Japan's most fearsome war machines, lines up her guns. The sky flashes white, a broadside. Shells the size of cars scream across the sky, each one carrying enough power to rip a destroyer in half. They miss for now, but not for long. Behind her, the destroyer USS Heermann races forward, her engines howling. Her crew watches in disbelief as the sea around them erupts with geysers of water and fire. Some men are frozen at their stations. Others shout over the roar, "We've got to hit back!" They load their guns, their torpedoes, and open fire at targets miles away. Battleships they can barely even see through the smoke. Johnston, already wounded, continues her attack. She's limping, her hull cracked, her deck scorched, but Evans refuses to pull back. He knows his ship can't last much longer, but that's not the point. Every shell they fire keeps the enemy distracted. Every torpedo they launch buys another minute for the fleeing carriers. In that moment, Evans doesn't see himself as a man doomed to die. He's a wall of steel holding back a tidal wave. On board the Japanese flagship Yamato, the scene is pure disbelief. Admiral Kurita watches the American destroyers charging toward his fleet like hornets. His officers report that the enemy appears to be much stronger than expected. Some even claim they've spotted heavy cruisers. It's a mirage of courage, small ships creating the illusion of a far greater force. Confusion spreads through the Japanese formation. "Orders clash!" Gunnery officers shout for range corrections. The fleet's fire control begins to falter. Meanwhile, high above, American carrier pilots join the fight. They launch from Taffy 3's tiny escort carriers, armed with whatever they can grab, some with bombs, others with only machine guns or depth charges. They dive toward the Japanese ships, strafing decks, forcing gunners to take cover. Even when out of ammo, some pilots make mock attack runs just to draw enemy fire away from the destroyers below. The teamwork is unspoken but absolute, every man fighting beyond the limits of reason. Hoyle takes the first fatal hit. A massive shell tears through her hull, detonating deep inside. The explosion rips through the ship like a chain reaction. Men are thrown into the air. Flames engulf the aft deck. But even as the ship lists, her guns keep firing, slower now, but defiant. Her torpedo launchers swing toward a Japanese cruiser. "Fire!" someone yells. The torpedoes rush out, white trails slicing through the sea. One finds its mark and a direct hit on the heavy cruiser Haguro. The Japanese ship slows, listing to one side. For a brief moment, it feels like victory. But victory is cruel. Hoyle takes another hit, then another. The final shells rip her apart. The sea swallows her whole. As she slips beneath the waves, her signalmen send out one last transmission. Enemy being held. Nearby, the tiny destroyer escorts Samuel B. Roberts. The Sammy B charges straight into a line of cruisers. Her crew is terrified, but they fight like veterans. The ship vibrates with every shot from her 5-inch gun. Her captain orders full speed, 28 knots, faster than she was ever designed to go. "We're going in," he says. And they do. At 4,000 yards, nearly point-blank range, she fires her torpedoes. They hit. The Japanese cruiser Chokai erupts in smoke and flame. The Sammy B weaves between splashes of incoming shells, her hull shuddering under near misses. She's punching far above her weight. And she's winning, even if only for a moment. Back on the Johnston, things are worse. The ship is barely afloat. Shells have destroyed her main battery, her engines are failing, and communications are cut. Evans is wounded, blood running down his face. But he won't abandon his post. He stands on the open bridge, shouting orders to the few men left who can still hear him. The destroyer circles, trying to protect the other American ships still fighting. Her guns are nearly silent now, but she refuses to die quietly. Overhead, Japanese shells whistle down. One smashes through the deckhouse. Another hits the rear gun mount. Fires rage out of control. The sea around the Johnston boils with steam and oil. Still, the ship fires her remaining gun manually, each shot aimed with nothing but courage and guesswork. Sailors load shells by hand, their faces black with smoke and sweat. To the Japanese gunners watching through rangefinders, the scene is madness. These small American ships are charging directly into their line of fire, not retreating, not surrendering, just attacking. The sight is both terrifying and inspiring. One Japanese officer later wrote, "We thought they were all going to die, but they kept coming." As the minutes drag on, the battle transforms into pure chaos. Smoke blinds both sides. Ships weave between rain and fire. Radio channels are jammed with overlapping voices. The Americans fight like cornered wolves, wild, desperate, unrelenting. The Japanese, uncertain of what's happening, begin to lose formation. Some of their cruisers veer off course, afraid of torpedoes that may not even exist. The psychological warfare of courage is doing what weapons can't. At 8:30 a.m., Johnston takes another direct hit that cripples her engines completely. The ship slows to a crawl, dead in the water. Evans gives the order to abandon ship, but many men refuse. They keep firing until the last shell is gone. The Johnston drifts, burning, listing heavily to port. Evans walks the deck one final time, shouting encouragement. "Get the wounded overboard! Save who you can!" A few minutes later, another shell hits the bridge. The ship shudders one last time, then begins to roll. The order is given. Abandon ship. She sinks slowly, her flag still flying. The sea around her is a graveyard, burning oil, lifeboats, and debris scattered across the waves. Survivors cling to rafts, watching as the battle continues without them. Some are pulled under by suction, others drift in silence. The roar of battle fades into distant thunder. But the fight isn't over yet. The remaining American ships, the Heermen, the carriers, and the few surviving planes, keep hammering the Japanese fleet. The carriers launch desperate sorties one after another, even when low on fuel. Pilots risk ditching at sea just to keep the pressure on. From above, the Japanese ships look scattered, disorganized, bleeding smoke. Then, incredibly, the tide begins to shift. Confused, battered, and uncertain of what kind of force they're facing, Admiral Kurita hesitates again. Reports flood in. Cruisers hit. Battleships damaged. American air attacks increasing. To him, it looks like a trap. He fears the main U.S. fleet might be just beyond the horizon, waiting to strike. The legend of American strength, amplified by the suicidal courage of a few destroyers, has done its job. By mid-morning, Kurita makes the unthinkable decision: to retreat. His battleships turn north, pulling away from the burning sea. The Japanese fleet, the pride of the Imperial Navy, withdraws from what should have been an easy victory. They never reach the landing beaches. They never complete their mission. And they never forget the tiny ships that stood in their way. The ocean grows quiet again, waves washing over wreckage and oil fires. Survivors float under the blazing sun, clinging to anything that floats. Some whisper prayers. Others stare at the horizon, dazed. They don't yet realize they've just taken part in one of the most heroic stands in naval history. Small but deadly, and unstoppable in spirit. The guns have fallen silent. The sky that was once filled with smoke now hangs eerily calm over the Pacific. The roar of battle fades into the whisper of waves. All around, the sea tells the story. Drifting wreckage, oil streaks shimmering in the sunlight, and men scattered across the water clinging to what's left of their ships. The fight is over, but for those still afloat, the struggle has only just begun. The destroyers, Johnston, Hull, and the brave little Samuel B. Roberts are gone. Some of the men who fought aboard them now drift together in small groups, tied to rafts or floating nets. Many are silent, too tired to speak. They've witnessed the impossible, their tiny ships taking on an entire enemy fleet and forcing it to retreat. But in the aftermath, reality sinks in. They are stranded in open water, hundreds of miles from land, with little food, no shelter, and the scorching tropical sun beating down. Hours pass. The ocean stretches endlessly in every direction. The survivors scan the horizon, hoping for rescue planes. Some try to cheer each other up, cracking jokes or humming songs just to keep their minds sharp. Others stare quietly into the distance, lost in thought. They don't yet realize that their actions, their courage, have changed the course of history. Back in Japan's fleet, confusion reigns. Admiral Kurita's decision to withdraw has shocked his officers. Many can't understand why they turned back when they had such overwhelming power. Kurita himself is conflicted. On paper, his force should have crushed the Americans. But what he saw that morning didn't look like a beaten enemy. It looked like a trap, one so convincing that even a veteran admiral chose caution over conquest. Word of his retreat spreads quickly through both navies. In Tokyo, some see it as a missed opportunity. In the U.S. fleet, it becomes a miracle. A story of courage that defied logic. For the men of Taffy 3, it means one thing: their sacrifice worked. The invasion of the Philippines will continue, and Japan's last chance to stop it has slipped away. As the day drifts into night, the survivors cling to hope. The sun sets over a crimson horizon, and the ocean grows cold. Some men whisper quiet prayers. Others talk about home, about families waiting across the ocean. They share what little water they have, passing canteens from hand to hand. Every hour feels longer than the last. The darkness brings new challenges. Strange sounds echo across the waves. The splash of debris, the creak of damaged rafts. The men stay close, trying to keep each other awake. They know that if they fall asleep in the water, they may never wake again. At dawn, a thin line of light breaks across the sky. The survivors look up, shielding their eyes, hoping to see rescue planes. Far above, an American patrol aircraft passes overhead. The men wave, shout, anything to be seen. At first, the plane doesn't notice. Then at the last moment, it circles back. The crew drops flares, a signal that help is coming. Cheers rise from the ocean. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, there's real hope. Rescue ships begin to arrive later that day, picking up men from rafts and floating debris. The survivors are pulled aboard, exhausted but alive. Some have burns, others are dehydrated, but most are just grateful to be safe. When they look back at the sea, they can hardly believe what they've lived through. The destroyers that once cut through these waters are gone, but their spirit lingers, small, defiant, and unforgettable. News of the battle spreads fast. Reports reach Admiral William Halsey, General MacArthur, and eventually Washington itself. The story of Taffy III, of destroyers that charged battleships, captures the imagination of the entire military. Even hardened officers find themselves in awe. It doesn't sound real, but it is. The official reports describe how a handful of American destroyers and escort carriers faced off against a vastly superior Japanese fleet and won, not by strength, but by sheer will. Back home, families wait for word. For some, the telegrams bring relief. For others, they bring sorrow. The names of lost ships become symbols of valor. The USS Johnston, Hole, and Samuel B. Roberts are remembered not for how they sank, but for how they fought. Newspapers call it the miracle at Samar. Historians will later call it one of the most extraordinary naval actions ever recorded. In the aftermath, survivors tell their stories. They speak of calm determination amid chaos, of captains who refused to turn away, and crews who fought to the last shell. They talk about the noise, the smoke, and the courage that came from somewhere deeper than fear. For many, it's still hard to believe. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and outmatched, yet they stood their ground and turned back one of the most powerful fleets ever assembled. For the Japanese Navy, the defeat at Samar marks the beginning of the end. Their surface fleet, already battered, will never again mount an offensive of that scale. The war in the Pacific moves toward its final chapters, battles fought not by massive fleets but by aircraft and island assaults. Yet the lesson of Samar remains. Power alone doesn't decide victory. Determination does. In the months that follow, some survivors of Taffy III return to new assignments. Others remain haunted by memories of that day. When asked how they did it, how they found the courage to charge head-on into certain death, most of them say the same thing. There was no time to think. They fought because someone had to, because turning away meant losing everything they believed in. One sailor, years later, would describe it simply, "We weren't heroes. We were just doing our jobs. But sometimes, doing your job means standing your ground, even when the world's on fire." The battle fades into history, but the legend endures. Military academies study it, naval officers quote it, filmmakers retell it, and generations later, the courage of those small destroyers still echoes across the waves. Proof that bravery isn't measured in tons of steel, but in the hearts of those who refuse to back down. The ocean, once a battleground, returns to calm. The waves lap gently against the silent sea, as if honoring the ships that fought there. Beneath the surface, the wrecks of the Johnston, Howell, and Sammy B rest quietly in the deep, their names engraved in history, their story a reminder that sometimes the smallest ships can make the biggest impact. The men of Taffy III didn't set out to be legends. They simply refused to run, and in doing so, they changed the course of a war. Years have passed since the guns fell silent at Samar. The Pacific has calmed, but the memories remain restless. For the sailors who survived, the battle never truly ended. It simply moved into their dreams. Each reunion, each handshake, each folded flag carries the echo of that day when courage was louder than gunfire. In the months after the battle, the United States Navy begins the long process of honoring those who fought. The official reports are staggering. 3 destroyers and 1 escort lost, but an entire invasion saved. Admirals reading the after-action logs can scarcely believe the accounts. Engaged battleships at close range. Charged without orders. Torpedoed enemy cruiser successfully. These lines read more like legend than record, yet every witness confirms them. Commander Ernest E. Evans of the USS Johnston is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the first Native American naval officer ever to receive it. His citation describes a man who gallantly led his ship in a determined attack against vastly superior forces. For his crew, the medal is more than recognition. It's proof that the world saw what they saw, a leader who turned duty into destiny. Across the fleet, other sailors receive Silver Stars and Navy Crosses. The names of Hull, Harriman, and Samuel B. Roberts become symbols whispered with pride at naval academies. Back home, the war grinds on. Families hang blue and gold stars in their windows. Children ask when their fathers will return. Letters arrive months late, some never at all. When the survivors finally make it back, they step off the trains quietly, carrying sea bags and the weight of memory. There are parades, of course, bands, flags, cheers, but the men of Taffy 3 mostly stand off to the side, humbled. They know the real heroes never left the Pacific. In classrooms and training halls, instructors retell the story. Diagrams are drawn on chalkboards, arrows, ranges, distances. Yet numbers never capture the feeling. The vibration of the deck, the blinding flashes, the heartbeat that outpaced the guns. Still, young officers listen in awe. They realize that naval warfare isn't only about technology or tonnage. It's about the will to act when logic says not to. As the decades roll forward, the legend of Taffy 3 grows. Books are written, documentaries aired. Veterans appear on television, their voices soft with age but clear with conviction. Each time they speak, new listeners discover that history's greatest victories sometimes come from those least equipped to win them. Meanwhile, the sea keeps its secrets. The exact resting places of the lost ships remain unknown. The Pacific is vast, and technology of the time can't reach those depths. For years, historians debate where Johnston, Hull, and the Sammy B might lie. Some believe they've vanished forever, swallowed by the trench's darkness. Others hold on to faith that one day the ocean will give them back. Then, long after the war, technology catches up with curiosity. In the early 2000s, deep-sea exploration vessels equipped with sonar and remotely operated cameras begin to search. The first images show twisted steel half buried in silt, gun barrels pointing eternally upward. Researchers compare hull shapes, markings, rivet patterns. And then one day, confirmation arrives. The USS Samuel B. Roberts, found at nearly 7,000 meters deep, the deepest wreck ever located. The world takes notice. Headlines call it the little ship that fought big. For surviving crewmen, now in their 90s, the discovery feels like closing a circle. They watch the footage with tears and smiles, seeing again the decks where they once stood. "She's still down there," one of them says softly. "Still on station." Soon after, another expedition locates the Johnston, resting even deeper. Her hull is scarred but intact, her guns still aimed as if waiting for orders. The ocean preserved her exactly as she fell, a monument of steel in perpetual salute. These discoveries reignite public fascination. Museums create new exhibits, displaying artifacts recovered from the deep. Fragments of plating, navigation instruments, even a ship's bell polished by time. Schoolchildren press their faces to glass cases, imagining the roar of battle that once surrounded these relics. Teachers tell them about courage, teamwork, and how leadership can rise from the unlikeliest places. Modern sailors visit the wreck sites through live feed cameras, offering quiet salutes from thousands of miles away. On the anniversaries of the battle, ships of today's U.S. Navy broadcast the message once sent by those destroyers under fire. Enemy being held. It's more than a transmission. It's a promise that the spirit of Taffy 3 endures. Across the Pacific in Japan, naval historians also study the event with respect. Modern Japanese officers often cite Samar as an example of bravery that transcends nations. They recognize that courage knows no flag. The men on both sides fought with conviction, but the Americans' willingness to face impossible odds became a lesson for generations of sailors around the world. Back in the United States, the story finds new life in film, literature, and digital media. Animations recreate the battle in vivid color. Historians interview surviving relatives. The phrase "small but deadly" becomes shorthand for courage under pressure. Veterans associations raise funds for memorials overlooking the sea at Samar, ensuring that the names of every sailor, American and Filipino alike, remain etched in stone. Time, however, keeps moving. The last survivors grow fewer each year. Yet even as their voices fade, their message becomes clearer. The value of courage isn't in winning, but in trying when no one expects you to. They remind listeners that leadership isn't about giving orders. It's about standing at the front when everything seems lost. On a calm morning decades later, a U.S. Navy destroyer sails near the battle site. Young sailors gather on deck as their commanding officer reads a passage from the logs of Taffy 3. The wind is light, the sea gentle. "These men showed us what it means to fight with heart," he says. "They remind us that ships are only as strong as the people aboard them." The crew stands silent, then rings the ship's bell 3 times in tribute. Beneath them, thousands of feet below, the lost destroyers rest quietly. Their metal has rusted, their decks are blanketed in coral dust, but their story remains untouched. In that stillness lies a kind of peace. The end of a journey that began with chaos and ended with honor. The sea has taken them, but history has made them immortal. As the sun sets over the same horizon where battle once raged, the light catches the waves just right, turning the ocean gold. It looks for a moment like the ships are still there, charging forward, fearless and small against the immensity of war. And in that glow, every sailor who ever faced the impossible can see themselves reflected in those little destroyers that refuse to back down. The legacy of Taffy 3 isn't just a chapter in textbooks. It's a reminder that heroism often comes from ordinary people thrust into extraordinary moments. They didn't plan to change history. They simply chose not to surrender to fear. And because of that choice, the world remembers them, not as victims of a lost cause, but as proof that determination can rewrite destiny. In the calm that followed World War II, military historians faced an extraordinary question: how could a handful of American destroyers and escorts repel one of the most powerful naval forces ever assembled by Japan? The answer, they realized, was not found in tonnage or weaponry, but in human will. The battle off Samar became more than a historical event. It became a case study in courage, tactics, and improvisation that would shape naval thinking for decades to come. The U.S. Navy quickly began analyzing every second of the encounter. War college instructors pored over radar logs, torpedo tracks, and communications transcripts. What they found astonished them. The destroyer captains had acted almost entirely on instinct and initiative, often without waiting for orders. When radar revealed the Japanese fleet closing in, those commanders didn't hesitate. They acted. That willingness to take responsibility under extreme pressure became a new model for naval command philosophy. Until Samar, destroyers were seen primarily as screening ships, fast, agile, but not meant to stand toe-to-toe with heavy cruisers or battleships. After Samar, that perception changed forever. The U.S. Navy reevaluated how smaller ships could be used aggressively in surface combat. Doctrine shifted toward flexibility, speed, and initiative. Commanders were encouraged to think independently, to act when communication broke down. In essence, the destroyer crews had written a new chapter in naval warfare through their actions alone. The Japanese perspective on Samar was equally revealing. In post-war interviews, surviving Japanese officers admitted that the ferocity of the destroyer counterattack created confusion and doubt at a critical moment. Vice Admiral Kurita himself, commanding the Japanese center force, was convinced he had encountered a far larger American fleet. Reports from his ship spoke of being attacked by heavy cruisers, not destroyers. The deception was entirely unintentional, but devastatingly effective. The courage of a few had made an entire fleet appear invincible. Naval analysts later calculated that if Kurita's fleet had pressed on, it could have caused catastrophic losses among the American invasion force at Leyte Gulf. Instead, the Japanese withdrew, ensuring the success of General MacArthur's return to the Philippines. That single decision, shaped by the chaos wrought by the destroyers, became a turning point in the Pacific War. It marked the moment Japan's naval power effectively ceased to threaten Allied operations in the region. In the years that followed, naval technology evolved rapidly: jet aircraft, guided missiles, nuclear propulsion, but the lessons of Samar never faded. Officers continued to study the battle as an example of leadership, communication, and morale under impossible conditions. At the Naval War College, Samar is still taught alongside major engagements like Midway and Coral Sea, not because of its scale, but because of its heart. It's a reminder that in combat, unpredictability often outweighs planning. Modern naval tactics now embrace a concept known as distributed lethality, the idea that smaller, more flexible units can deliver disproportionate impact when acting decisively. It's the Samar spirit reborn in 21st century form. When today's missile destroyers or littoral combat ships train for surface warfare, they echo the same principle that guided Evans, Copeland, and Roberts. Don't wait for perfect conditions. Act with courage and precision. The legacy of the Taffy 3 task group also redefined how navies view morale. Military psychologists studied survivor accounts and found that camaraderie, trust, and shared mission were the invisible armor that allowed crews to keep fighting under hopeless odds. Sailors who had served together for months developed a rhythm of communication and confidence that machines could not replicate. Their unity turned fear into fuel. This insight reshaped how modern fleets train crews, not just as operators of equipment, but as cohesive, resilient teams. The battle also became a symbol of cooperation between nations. Filipino forces, operating from shore positions and supporting American efforts, played an integral part in defending Leyte. Decades later, joint U.S.-Philippine naval exercises would reference the Battle off Samar as a shared moment of valor. Memorials now stand in both countries, honoring not only the American sailors but the Filipino civilians and coast watchers who risked their lives to relay intelligence and rescue survivors. In 2019, researchers aboard the RV Petrel, funded by the late Paul Allen, confirmed the wreck of USS Johnston more than 6,000 meters below the surface. In 2022, a subsequent mission using modern submersibles captured high-definition footage of the ship resting upright, its hull number 557 still visible. For the first time, the world could see the very ship that had led the charge. The images spread across news outlets and classrooms, reigniting public interest in a story long overshadowed by larger battles. It was as if the ocean itself had decided it was time to remind humanity of what courage looked like. Today, the names of those small ships, Johnston, Howell, Heermann, Samuel B. Roberts, are etched into plaques, museum walls, and memorial stones across the world. Every few years, the U.S. Navy names a new vessel in their honor, passing their legacy forward to new generations of sailors. During commissioning ceremonies, speakers often quote Commander Evans's last known words, "We're going in." The crowd always falls silent after that phrase because everyone understands its meaning. It's more than an order. It's an attitude. Even within the technological marvels of today's Navy, Aegis radar, hypersonic weapons, autonomous systems, the human factor remains irreplaceable. The men of Taffy 3 proved that strategy and machinery are powerless without resolve. Their example reminds every officer and sailor that heroism doesn't depend on rank or firepower. It begins with a decision to stand and fight when retreat seems easier. The battle off Samar also had a subtle but lasting impact on how military historians interpret courage. Before this event, naval history often celebrated massive fleets and decisive victories. Samar shifted the narrative. It showed that valor could emerge from desperation and that moral victory could outweigh material defeat. Even though the destroyers were outnumbered and many were lost, their resistance altered the outcome of a much greater campaign. They didn't just save ships, they safeguarded the entire Pacific strategy. In the modern U.S. Navy, when recruits finish basic training, they study real battles to understand what service truly means. Among those case studies, Samar remains one of the most frequently discussed. Instructors emphasize not the violence, but the leadership lessons, initiative, resilience, and loyalty to one another. Those traits, they say, are the foundation of every successful mission. Each generation of sailors inherits the Taffy 3 spirit, whether they realize it or not. On anniversaries of the battle, Navy destroyers around the world sound their horns in tribute. Flags dip at half-mast, wreaths are cast into the sea. For a brief moment, the ocean connects the present with the past. Somewhere out there, below miles of dark water, the silent hulks of the destroyers rest in formation, still guarding the freedom they helped secure. The current swirls gently around their decks, like an eternal salute. The battle off Samar is no longer just a wartime episode. It's a blueprint for how humanity endures under pressure. It teaches that leadership is not about commanding perfect circumstances, but about making imperfect ones count. It reminds every generation that courage is contagious, that determination can multiply strength, and that sometimes the smallest ships can carry the heaviest burdens of history. So when the story of the Pacific War is told, from Pearl Harbor to Hiroshima, there will always be a pause at Samar. It's the point where the impossible happened, where ordinary men aboard tiny destroyers face down giants and refuse to yield. And long after the last survivor has joined his shipmates beneath the waves, their spirit will continue to guide those who sail into the unknown, reminding the world that even in the darkest storms, the light of bravery never goes out.